Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Romali here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for June 4th, 2021, recorded on 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, we continue to monitor absolutely nothing at the moment, which is certainly good news for this time of the year. We do have strong upper level winds cutting across in the eastern Pacific basin all the way across the Atlantic, and you can see some of these higher upper level cirrus clouds stretching well away from any associated convection. Notice there is a big plume of Saharan air that is now moving off of Africa, and this will be traversing over the Atlantic basin the next few days and make its way to the Lesser Antilles within the next 4 or 5 days. The intertropical convergence zone is definitely very suppressed at the moment. You can kind of see the intertropical convergence zone is fairly suppressed here, and that is likely to remain the case for the next while, but it is slowly moving towards the north, and this line will be advecting northward as we progress over the next several months. And elsewhere, really only one other system to watch in the eastern Pacific, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Now, looking at the sea surface temperature anomaly maps last updated as of yesterday, we're not really going to be focusing on too much other than this cool blob right here off the coast of the California area and certainly off the Baja Peninsula. And as we've talked about over the last several days, this has some implications in terms of the Atlantic hurricane season. Now, we mainly focused on the ENSO over the last several months, the Southern Oscillation Index here, and we've also been monitoring the Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies. But this cooler blob has a significant meaning, and as you notice, that the only real conducive area for Eastern Pacific tropical cyclones is in a very small window in here, very small window for Eastern Pacific tropical cyclones to actually develop. Once you start getting out closer towards about 120 west, you start to lose a lot of your upper ocean heat content. You start to lose a lot of your warmer temperatures at the surface of the water, and you can see where these cooler anomalies are dominated. In some cases, about 2.5 degrees to 3 degrees Celsius below the long-term average. And this has implications because this limits spatially where tropical cyclones are and how strong they get. This is a very spatial limiter, and what I mean by that is it limits the time and relative location in which tropical cyclones in the Eastern Pacific can actually form and intensify. So, likely for Hawaii this year, you've had some close calls over the last few years. Hopefully, this means, of course, that we won't really see much for Hawaii, but of course, these water temperatures will warm a little bit, but again, they're not going to be warming significantly. And with the lack of any warm water out here for these tropical cyclones to work with, it really limits the amount of upward moving air that can get going over the entire Eastern Pacific basin. And because this will likely be shut down, this means that the Atlantic basin, will highlight this in green here, the Atlantic Main Development Region and the Caribbean here in the Gulf of Mexico will all be plus checkmarked here in terms of favorable for the peak of the hurricane season. So this has a lot of implications, and that's why we're going to be talking about it over the next several days and weeks, because this has some meaning going forth with time in terms of how active the Atlantic basin could be. So that's certainly something to kind of keep in mind. And of course, the Atlantic basin is still warming ever so slightly. Again, temperatures now have rebounded to near average. We're just slightly below the long-term average. Again, we're using a different data set here. Different data sets will report different things, but by and large, the Atlantic will be warm enough for the peak of the season, undoubtedly. And speaking of sea surface temperatures, this is the look at the Gulf of Mexico, the actual sea surface temperatures, not just the anomalies now. We're looking at the actual skin temperatures here. And water temperatures for most of the basin are now running at or just slightly above average, especially in the southern half of the basin over here. Water temperatures for most of the areas sitting roughly around 27 to 28 Celsius. You can see the Bay of Campeche down here sitting at about 28 to 29 Celsius, off the tip of Cuba here, roughly about 29. And this warm patch right here, this 28 Celsius anomaly here, or actual temperature, this actually has some degree of implication going forth with time. Now, We continue to talk about this, but this has a lot of meaning, especially over the next several weeks as we enter a more favorable pattern in the Atlantic, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But this has a lot of implication because if you get a faster moving tropical cyclone to move across this area, you do notice that up here, yes, at the shelf waters, we're sitting at maybe about 26 Celsius. You can kind of see, anywhere from about 26 Celsius to roughly about 26 and a half Celsius. But these water temperatures are not cool. They're not sitting, 25, 24 Celsius like you see here off the tip of the northern Florida Peninsula here near Jacksonville. And because you don't see that, again, any tropical cyclone that is quick moving will likely have a hard time weakening in through here if wind shear is not in its presence. So in other words, if you have a very favorable shear environment across the Gulf of Mexico, you get a fast moving tropical cyclone, it's not likely to weaken much. If it's moving 15, 20 miles an hour, like we've seen, with other cyclones, before, i.e., Hurricane Michael, and obviously Delta last year did much of the same thing where it just kept on intensifying because it did not have a lot of time to weaken under the face of cooler sea surface temperatures, and it doesn't have enough time to upwell those waters that are cooler. And kind of another look at that is the upper ocean heat content values, and again, we've been talking about this over the last several days and we'll continue to talk about it. Again, what you're looking at here is the depth of the 26-degree isotherm. So that's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or really to be exact, about 79.9. So really about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. But anywhere here in the lighter blue colors onwards towards the right of the scale, let's do that a little bit better. Towards the right of this scale is basically increasing upper ocean heat content, basically allowing these tropical cyclones to only upwell warmer and warmer water, so it doesn't upwell cooler water. And again, we've been noticing over the last several weeks here that we do have this nice little green spot over here. And this represents that we probably have anywhere between about 60 to roughly about 75 in the terms of upper ocean heat content, which is fairly substantial for this time of the year. And given the fact that we do have this warmer pool here, again, this warm pool that extends all the way over there, it definitely seems relatively favorable that we have that kind of shaping up. So it's definitely something to kind of monitor as we progress over the next several days or so. And it will be something to monitor, but again, not really watching for any substantial development at the moment, but we'll talk about that here. Speaking of, this is the look here at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook. Again, not really much going on here. The National Hurricane Center does not expect any development over the next several days or so. And because of that, that is likely to kind of limit what we are going to be talking about. But in the Eastern Pacific Basin, we do notice that we do have an area of disturbed weather, an invest area 92E, now designated by the National Hurricane Center. And this has a 60% chance over the next several days as it will gradually turn off towards the west. Really not seeing any substantial threat that this impacts Mexico or the Baja, so not really too concerned about this. But again, we'll be watching, maybe generating some swells that radiate outwards. But other than that, not really expecting this to become a big deal for any land at the particular moment. So that's all good. Nothing happening in the immediate. But what about the long range? Well, the long-range European ensembles here, this is the 200 millibar velocity potential anomalies. And again, this is about 35,000 feet, so about the level that, airliners fly. And what we're looking at here, this is about June 3rd right here. So this is as of yesterday. This goes all the way out to about June 17th. And this is the correlating area shown here in the map. So this is the map here. And again, what we're looking at, the blues here in the greens, this is basically favorable upward moving air, and suppressed unfavorable air is basically represented in these orange and red colors. So what we're looking at right now is that we have a lot of favorable conditions for upward moving air, especially centered over the Western Pacific and portions of the Eastern Pacific. And this will be sliding over the next several days. Again, this is out to in the future, going down with time, and going up is basically going into present time. So again, what we see here is that we have a large bout of favorable conditions that will likely be setting up over the Eastern Pacific for the next about week or so. You can kind of see this roughly correlates to the Eastern Pacific Basin and partially some of the Caribbean as well. And then eventually we slide this all the way over, and this moves by about June 15th over to the Atlantic Basin. And we notice that it kind of just parks itself there. And if we notice that we also have this really deep, dark kind of blue here, which indicates a lot of upward moving air centered over Africa. And this is likely to promote very healthy tropical waves that will be rolling off of Africa, which is here, that will roll off of Africa and try to maybe establish itself and get some roots out there in the main development region. Now, the MDR is still a little too cool for development, but it's not that cold. And you can see that water temperatures are near average or running slightly above average across most of the basin. And certainly once you get about, over 60 west, which is roughly through here, you can kind of see that we definitely warm up, and those water temperatures past 60 west are definitely more favorable. But we do notice that even out here, past about June 9th, we could see this bout of favorability move into the, kind of the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And with the potential for a Central American gyre to form, it would not surprise me in the least if we maybe try to get a tropical cyclone or two to try to develop in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, which we'll talk about right now. This is the GFS 12Z run, valid for 2 p.m. this afternoon. And again, we notice that right now the Atlantic is being dominated by a very stout Bermuda high, and that is kind of pumping a lot of tropical moisture out across into the northeastern United States. We've had a few severe weather reports over the last several days, but we kind of have a lot of this deep tropical moisture that is feeding all the way around this big Bermuda high. And notice that we do have an area over here trying to consolidate in the Eastern Pacific Basin, and that eventually does go on to develop within the next about 3 days. You can see that becoming a bundled cyclone here by 2 p.m. Sunday, and that is becoming more favorable and more likely that that actually happens. The Atlantic Basin is still being shut down. You do notice that this is fairly far away. It's about 477 nautical miles away from the coast of Mexico here, so not really a threat there. Now we'll move this forward out in time, and you start to see really once we get to near day 5, days 4 and 5, we start to see bundling of the energy down here across Central America. And what this really indicates, you can kind of see that cyclonic vorticity that actually does occur. It kind of wraps itself up. What this is probably the development of the Central American gyre down here across Central America. And we can see that it does have a long-standing effect in that it does develop a tropical cyclone in the Eastern Pacific beyond 5 days and tries to move into Central America here. And that is something that will have to be watched very carefully because, again, this system kind of develops here. This is day 5. And, this is, so that's, Wednesday. This is really about 8 a.m. Wednesday. We go to a fully developed tropical cyclone by 2 p.m. Thursday. So within a day, we have what could be a bona fide tropical depression or storm within the region of Central America and Mexico moving inland. And that could definitely cause some concerns. So this is only really, a day, later that we could be dealing with a bona fide tropical storm in the Eastern Pacific moving inland across Central America. So again, there is some things that have to be monitored here. Now, whether or not this actually happens or not, again, it's too early to really determine that, and the Hurricane Center certainly hasn't highlighted anything. We move this even forward in time, we can see that we start to get more vorticity that tries to develop out here in the Caribbean and in the Bay of Campeche. And one thing that we're going to have to watch here is how the euro responds. This is the 0Z euro, valid as of 0Z. We'll move this out here. This is 0Z tonight, so this is about 8 p.m. tonight. And we move this forward here, we can see that the euro kind of agrees with the GFS. A little bit difference on the timing, but the placement is pretty much the same in the general idea that there will be some bundling of the energy trying to occur in the Eastern Pacific and move eventually inland across portions of Central America and Mexico. And whatever this system is out here, probably extratropical nature. But by and large, the Euro agrees with the GFS, but just a different timing. And to kind of corroborate that, this is the GFS kind of mean sea level pressure anomalies. And again, the pressure pattern right now dominated by very stout ridging across the Atlantic. But we move this out in time, and if we kind of move this forward, we notice that we get a relative kind of easement in this, or the fact that we actually get a below normal pressure anomalies across most of the Atlantic basin and certainly the Caribbean. And we'll, just for the sake of it, put on the ensemble mean sea level pressure for this time. And you notice that there's a clustering of anomalies out here suggesting maybe some low pressure development there, maybe something in the Caribbean. If we kind of scoot this out further in time, we start getting a much bigger signal for that to kind of occur. We can see that there is a bigger signal that arises beyond, days 7 and 8 and 9, that we start to actually get something that could try to develop down here in the Caribbean. So the models are definitely flipping and flopping. We'll move this back to the 6Z run, and the 6Z run didn't really have too much, but again, this general area is still very low pressures down here in this area. Certainly not seeing any stout ridging across the area. We'll move this even back. I don't know if it will go back there. There's the 0Z run. And again, the 0Z run, much of the same thing, but we're just not seeing a lot of consistency. You can see here in the 18Z run from yesterday, tropical cyclone, somewhere near Mexico. We move this even forward again. It definitely is wish-washy. You can see here the 12Z run for yesterday had that, anomaly back there. So the models are kind of flipping and flopping, but it does seem, as we have kind of ran down the time, you notice this, we'll go back here to yesterday's run. This is hour 234, and we move this now to hour 210. So this has come down in time, and the modeling is still being, while it's inconsistent, we could say, it is showing that there is something, and it has kept at least some lower pressures out here in the Caribbean. So as this kind of scoots down with time, this is starting to become one of those GFS fantasy hurricane or fantasy cyclones into much more of a believable kind of pattern, as we have seen with the fact that we have a very favorable pattern setting up really over the next several days and weeks. And again, the GEFS ensembles agree with that. Furthermore, this is the European ensembles, and again, we'll just kind of run this forward here. The European ensembles agree very heavily with the idea that there is something that could be developing down here in the Eastern Pacific, and a lot of it does try to cross over into the Bay of Campeche or the Gulf of Mexico, or maybe something similar forming in the Caribbean. So there is some stuff to watch. Again, it's not really anything we have to be concerned about, but it is something that we'll watch. Again, this is hurricane season, and it is just that time to monitor things. So the best advice right now, just continue to monitor everything. And of course, this is still very far out in time, beyond the next 5 days, so nothing to worry about. But again, keep in touch, and certainly have your hurricane preparedness plans in place and be ready to go just in case if anything does come your way. Hey, look, that's all I have for you today. Channel memberships are live on YouTube. Links will be down in the description down below if you guys do want to support that. Of course, you can also hit the join button on the YouTube homepage, on my channel page rather, or next to the subscribe button on this video. All right, that being said, I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.